if you just let my colleague Grace know, she'll pop her details in the chat. We do want today to be interactive, but there are many people on the call today. So we do ask that you keep yourself on mute, and we'll be using the chat function today to share any thoughts, questions. We'll also be using Menti throughout, so hopefully a good way for everyone to share your views, get involved. Today's definitely just the start of the conversation, which we and Wigan Council would like to continue. So at this point, before I share any more about the event, I'm really pleased to hand over to David Molyneux, MBE, leader of Wigan Council, who's going to share a few opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Dawn, and welcome everybody. I've got the nice bit this morning, just welcoming you all to this launch event. I was only thinking back to when we first launched the deal. I was thrown in front of the camera by the then leader, can you go and speak to the BBC local news about the deal? Which was really great fun, as we didn't really know what the deal was at that stage, but I did get through the interview and survived it. And I think that step we made, looking back to 2012, in terms of what we saw as a vision for Wigan back in those days. And we're now on this new journey, because I think when we talk about Wigan's journey, the journey from the deal to the new era and progress with unity has been an interesting one. It's been a learning curve in a lot of ways, and I think we set the stall for everybody to have a look at. And I know from the number of visitors that we get asking about how does it work, what's the difference, and people come in and see how it works and see the difference it makes. What I do feel with now, with the progress with unity in the new era, certainly it's the next step, and we're at the start of that journey. And we want to make sure that everybody buys into what we want to achieve and what we've seen so far from our partners, because partnerships are a big important part of this, is absolutely spot on. And I think people saw from when we first launched it and bought into it very early on. So I'm sure as we go through this event today, you will witness what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve, and the support that we've got from partners, which is critical in terms of delivery. A big thank you to Collaborate and IPPR North, because it's been an interesting journey. And I always remember the first comments, why do you want to do this? Well, I think it shows very much so as we move forward why we do want to do it and what are our aims of what we want to achieve. So please enjoy the day. I know there are some good presentations and there's some good speakers with you today, so I'm sure that you'll enjoy it, and I'll speak to you later. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Molyneux. So to give you a flavour of what's coming today, in terms of purpose, today is about sharing the Wigan Borough journey, Wigan Council journey, and particularly in a spirit of openness and honesty, as Councillor Molyneux said. It's been a learning curve. The world has changed. So this is really about kind of sharing in the spirit of honesty, in the hope that it encourages others to do the same. It's about connecting. Hopefully there'll be lots of connections made today, and we will be using Menti to identify what areas you'd all like to learn about together in the future. It's definitely not about Wigan having all the answers. It is about us all learning together, and after today, connecting people who've got interests and examples in different fields and areas, learning together and being stronger for it. And then it's also about building that wider movement for change in public service reform. How do we get person-centred, relational, collaborative approaches at the heart of the public service reform conversation? So that's the aim for today. And in terms of the agenda, we'll be starting in a moment with a bit of input from me and my colleague Lee. As Councillor Molyneux said, Collaborate and IPPR North did some engagement back in 2023 to really help shape Wigan's new era. So we'll be sharing a few headlines from that. We'll then hand over to a panellist of Wigan-based partners, and they'll share a little bit about Progress with Unity, what it is, where it came from, what it means. We'll then have a Q&A session, really digging deeper into what does implementation of this place-based approach look like in practice. And then we'll actually look beyond Wigan. So we're delighted to be joined by Dan Wellings, Claire Taylor, and Nick Kimber, who will all bring a broader national perspective on Wigan's journey and explore what this means for the broader national movement. And then we'll finish with handing over to you as participants to gain your reflections, hear what you'd like to explore more after today's session. So that's the plan for today. As I said, please do use the chat throughout to share questions, reflections. Please post your thoughts on Menti. But the only final thing to say is we're trying to pack in a lot to 2 hours. We're not planning to take a break. So if you need to step away at any point, please do. But yeah, I think that is everything to get us started. And before we dive in, we're going to do a quick Menti poll just to get a sense of who's in the Teams room today, and what you're looking for from today's event. Grace, would you like to talk us through how to get started?
Yes, no problem. So if you haven't used Menti before, hopefully you can see on the screen there's a URL and also a QR code. So you can just kind of navigate to that link either on your computer or on your phone, and we'll go through the questions together, and hopefully it should be quite self-explanatory. The code is on the screen if you need it, and that will remain at the top of the screen throughout the slides. Just give you a minute to get there, and I'll pop that in the chat as well.
Hopefully Menti will work for everyone. If you have any problems as we run through the questions, feel free to pop your answers in the chat as well. Okay, shall we get started with the first question? So first question, where are you joining from today? Whereabouts in the UK? Or if you're not in the UK, feel free to pop that in the chat. Hopefully you can pop a dot on the screen to indicate where you're based. Wow, a real spread, quite a lot in the northeast, but also most regions of England and also Scotland as well. But yeah, I can see a big Wigan crowd starting to emerge. Thanks, Brett. Feel free to share your answers in the chat. Yeah, really good coverage across the country, I guess shows the breadth of interest in today's discussion and in the deal. I'll give you 20 more seconds for anyone who hasn't managed to share yet. Okay, and then moving on to question 2. What sector do you work in? We were struck how diverse the sign-ups were across many different types of organisation and sector. So yeah, I'll be interested to see where everyone's joining from today. Lots of local government, unsurprisingly, a really good number of voluntary community social enterprise sector. Get a sense of who's joining you on the call today. Yeah, great to see. Like VCSE representation is so high. Definitely a really important part of today's conversation. We're hearing from Farai in a moment about his experience from a voluntary sector perspective. Okay, and then moving on to the final question. So kind of what brought you here today? What interests you about Wigan Borough, Wigan Council's journey? Oh wow, hopefully, yeah, this is a good induction for whoever's about to start a new role at Wigan Council. Exciting time to join. Yeah, real interesting partnership, learning from the approach, community power, sharing power, bottom-up approaches, hearing about work with the VCSE and communities. A real focus on community, person-centered approaches. Interesting, climate change. How you change culture, yeah, that'll be an interesting one to explore today, one of the key strengths of the deal. Yeah, perspectives about shared system challenges. So we will have the opportunity today to hear from partners in different parts of the system about how progress with unity resonates with them, but also what challenges it might pose and how to overcome some of those. Thanks so much for sharing, everyone. Hopefully we'll get to touch on many of those, if not all of them today. And as I said, there will be a chance at the end to share any questions or things you'd like to explore further. So thanks very much for engaging in that, sharing a little bit about you and your interest in today. So to get today's session started, my colleague Lee and I are going to share a few headlines from the engagement we did back in 2023 in partnership with IPPR North. We're going to keep it brief because these are all documented in the report that we've launched today. You should have a copy of that and we'll send it out later. But just to get us started and set the scene for Progress with Unity, we just wanted to share a little bit about where it came from. So Grace, if we move to the next slide. In 2023, the Council embarked on a process of strategic review and reset. They appointed Collaborate and IPPR North to help do some engagement to understand what was working about their approach and what needed to change. As Councillor Molyneux said, one of our first responses was, well, why? Why do you want to review the deal? Surely it's working really well. It's got such resonance, such external interest. But, you know, the deal had been introduced over a decade before. It was, at the time, a really radical response to austerity. It was about rethinking that relationship between council and local residents. That has created lots of positive change across the borough, lots of interest externally. But the council knew that by 2023, in the wake of the pandemic, it was time for what they started to call the new era. So our task as Collaborate and IPPR North was to explore what should that new era look like. What were the strengths of the deal to build on? What were the areas for improvement? And importantly, you know, the world had changed. How could the borough respond to the challenges facing the borough today? In the wake of the pandemic, ongoing financial pressures, increasing inequality, there was obviously a real need to refocus on what people in the borough needed to thrive. So our task was to both do some engagement to help chart a bold and ambitious new direction for the council and for the borough, but also to do that in a way that really kind of built a refreshed movement for change across the borough. Wigan Council were clear from the start this had to be a partnership endeavour. So it was about engaging in a way that really builds that momentum, that energy, that sense of shared ownership. So Lee, would you like to describe a little bit about what the engagement looked like?
Yes.
If we go back one slide, that's it.
Good morning, everyone. So we did a range of things as part of the engagement alongside IPPR North. We held interviews with council staff and cabinet members, as well as folks from the voluntary and community sector, and with partners like the Police College, Health Partners, Combined Authority, as well as organizations external to the borough. We did focus groups as well with some partners and with the youth cabinet. We had workshops with council staff and sense-making sessions to bring together the insights with the voluntary sector, voluntary and community sector partners, as well as council staff. We did do quite a few, had quite a few conversations with residents as well. And we didn't do that alone. We did it with a community connection group, which was a group of a dozen or so folks from the community and voluntary sector and faith organizations based in the borough. They also had conversations with residents, and we invited that group to bring their own kind of knowledge and expertise and experiences as well to collectively shaping the new era vision. So that group really helped place leaders from the kind of third sector at the heart of the work and fostered ownership of the findings. And that group also was interested in bringing together the insights and synthesizing them with council staff. So staff were invited to participate in sessions which helped to foster kind of shared understanding and mutual trust as a foundation for a more equal relationship moving into the new era. And that also meant that depending on where people were coming from, they were all reflecting on their own roles in creating change from their position in the system. Next slide. Hand it back to Dawn.
Thanks, Lee. So to briefly share the key findings of the engagement. Firstly, our first key finding was the core DNA of the council's culture was really strong. The behaviours, the principles, the focus on asset-based working and the sense of permission to work differently, as was a supportive, warm, can-do culture. That was a key strength that had been fostered through the deal. And there was an authentic commitment to the deal culture and behaviours across staff and a real sense of pride in working for the council. There were also positive relationships extending beyond the council. Partnership was the way things were done in Wigan Borough. This was really demonstrated in the pandemic through a real partnership response. And all of this culture was underpinned by a real sense of pride in place from the council, wider partners and from residents themselves. So in terms of culture, real strengths. However, there had been a period of rapid change, the pandemic, lots of staff change. So while senior members of the council had recognised the deal was no longer fit for purpose, in the absence of a new approach, staff were looking for clarity and guidance. What was replacing the deal? What was the culture? Where have all the kind of staff engagement approaches that were so instrumental in the deal gone? So the key priority here was kind of building on the strength and starting to reignite some of those key foundations of staff engagement that was so crucial to fostering these shared behaviours. We move on to the next slide.
So while the deal brought hope about how the council could respond to austerity in particular, it was not always clear how the deal could help respond to some wider challenges. And many of these have become even more pronounced, for example, the cost of living crisis and the climate emergency. I'm going to just share a few headlines about what we found from the engagement from the perspective of opportunities for the council, opportunities to kind of further the intentions that were built into the deal and also to respond to some newer or more pronounced challenges that have become more of a focus. So next slide. The first of these things, these headlines, is to do with a clearer strategic direction. So that means what the council's working towards, the outcomes sought, the challenges being prioritized, which wasn't so much a key focus of the deal. And that strategic focus we found was lagging behind the cultural progress that had been made. So that, in other words, the emphasis was more on how than what, heart than head, and they could be rebalanced. So the new strategic direction in the new era seemed to need to bring a more explicit focus on tackling inequalities and ensuring everyone has opportunities, acknowledging and addressing barriers that people face, for example, linked to disability, race and class divisions, and helpful in this kind of work, this kind of prioritization and strategic direction setting is data. We found more room for gathering and using data within the council and sharing data, which could be really instrumental in setting that strategy. On the next slide is a second headline finding, which has to do with delivering the basics well. So while asset-based, kind of strengths-based relational working was well established, in large part due to the deal, in areas of the council, such as adult social care, other areas felt less responsive to needs and preferences of residents. We heard in conversations and through all the other
all the other forms of engagement. And I neglected to mention there were surveys as well. There was a survey with residents and a survey with staff. We heard about difficulties of accessing support, of having to be transferred to multiple people before getting the help needed, some long waits without good outcomes. And many of those challenges were experienced most acutely by those who are most reliant on council services, for example, council tenants. So we saw a need in the new era to renew a commitment to delivering high quality core services and recognize the impact of those services disproportionately on those who experience particular challenges due to intersecting inequalities. And that means a more joined up approach across many different council services to ensure that that kind of experience for residents. And finally, on the next slide is a headline about a more trusting and enabling relationship, both with the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise sector and also with residents. So on the kind of third sector side, organizations felt that they could be more equal partners and had lost some confidence in relationship with the council. And residents likewise felt that there's room for a more equal and enabling relationship. Lots of recognition of the ways that council staff culture and behaviors were, having effects out in the world and in how people engaged with the council. Some also felt that the kind of we will, you will framing of the deal was transactional and didn't quite do justice to collaboration. And so by 2023, when we were doing this work, the deal resonated. We understood that the deal was resonating more beyond Wigan Borough than locally for a variety of reasons. And as a part of resetting relationships and more authentically connecting through collaboration, there was an opportunity to balance the focus on positivity, which is super important. And I saw in the response to the Menti in what people are interested in today, an emphasis on strong, not wrong, and this kind of strengths-based approach, super important. And also at times talking about the realities of poverty and inequality can be really important and reinforce rather than diminish hope for the future. So that became, that kind of surfaced as an important priority, which is of course a really delicate balance, but crucial for having more honest conversations with which people really said they were wanting. And I'll hand it back to Dawn.
And the final key finding was, transformation within the council was going to be so crucial as part of a new era, but it was really clear that the council could not respond to both the opportunities and the challenges facing the borough alone. So there was a real appetite for a collective endeavour. The borough, as with the rest of the country, were facing deep-rooted systemic challenges, including inequality. So it was clear it needed to be a collaborative effort, and also it needed to go beyond services. It needed to encompass a focus on economy, skills, thriving connected communities. How can the whole borough best use its resources to help the borough and its people thrive? So what was needed in the new era was collective strategic focus. Just as the council needed clear strategic direction, so did partners collectively. And there also need to be a sense of shared ownership. While the deal had featured a really positive focus on partnership, the deal was always seen as a council-owned initiative. So this was about, how do we get that shared ownership across the whole borough? This is something we're owning together, we have shared responsibility for. So it was clear in 2023 that there was an appetite. It was the right time to launch this kind of new movement for change across Wigan Borough. So next we're going to hear from speakers from within Wigan Borough about how they acted on these findings, how they translated into progress with unity. And we just wanted to acknowledge the kind of openness and humility with which the council and partners received these findings, and also the pace at which they implement it. We're a year or so in, and already so much has happened. So we'll get to explore that today. And I think it just reflects the really strong foundations that were in place and the can-do spirit that we saw again again and again in Wigan Borough. So at this point, I'd just like to introduce our panel for the next section, which is all about telling the Wigan Borough story. This is the story of progress with unity. So first, I'm really pleased to welcome Alison Mackenzie-Folan, OBE, who's Chief Exec of Wigan Council. In a moment, Alison's going to tell us a little bit about progress with unity, what it is, where it came from, what it looks like. We're also joined by Farai Nakaniso.
Show me what you're going to have. Bring it up.
Oh, if you could pop yourself on mute if you're in the audience. So Farai is co-founder of Everything Human Rights, a charity based in Wigan Borough, and he was also a member of the Community Connection group that Lee referred to, so he can share a bit of his experience. And we're also joined by Mary Fleming, CEO of Wrightington, Wigan and Lee NHS Foundation Trust. So Mary can talk to what progress with unity looks like from a health perspective. And then we're also joined by Councillor Nazia Rayman. Nazia is Cabinet Member at Wigan Council, and she's got the portfolio for resources, finance and transformation, so can share a little bit about what progress with unity means for that brief. So Alison, I'll hand over to you to start with, and then we'll bring in the other panellists.
Oh, thanks so much, Dawn. Can you hear me okay, Dawn? Just testing the technology. Oh, that's great. And thanks for putting the slides up. So Dawn and Lee have really set the scene beautifully in terms of our journey, and a massive thanks to Collaborate and IPPR North for helping us on that journey and being so supportive and really helping us through our learning. And I think, as Dawn said, I think the first question you asked, and Anna asked us, wasn't it, Dawn and Lee, was, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And we knew deep down in our hearts that actually what we wanted to do was really reflect a learning experience about actually where have we not gone far enough as a council and as a partnership. What have we not done that we really hoped that we'd do over the last 10 or 15 years, and what do we need to change? So it was a really reflective, courageous experience, so a massive thanks. And the report's there to read from Collaborate, which gives a real deeper insight into what's been going on. But for me, it is a real partnership approach between our residents, our businesses, our public services, the NHS, and most importantly, our community organisations. And we've done that reflection all together. And we've had that honest conversation about what's not worked, what has worked. And so, as you said, Dawn and Lee, this is a new movement for change. Progress with unity is actually what we're going to do now for the next decade. And it's really about how we build on some of those successes, some of those opportunities, but also learn the lessons, which is most important to us, and learning the lessons through the conversations that you helped us with in the last 18 months through that strong partnership that we've developed across the borough. And also I think what you'll hear from some of our panel members and some of our politicians and community sector and Mary, as you said, is that this is the start of it, really. This is building, it's not the final version, we're building the foundations, and this will swap and change, but we've certainly wedded to these 6 ways of working, which I'll briefly go through, and the missions that we'll talk about. But it's the start of our new era, and we'll really work and carry on doing that deep listening. So in terms of the magic ingredients, one of the things that Collaborate and IPPR did was think about what has really worked in Wigan and what do we really need to concentrate on as a partnership, what works for us. And I think you said, Dawn and Lee, that what we wanted to do is make sure that we could continue to build in Wigan. The most important thing to us is person-centred, public person-centred services. Really collaborative, the way we do that across all of the partnerships in the community sector, but also carrying on being bold and carrying on wanting to make sure that we improve outcomes. And for us, the most important thing was tackling inequalities, and that's really what we wanted to get down to. So the 6 magic ingredients you see here is what we talk about all of the time. Briefly going through them, see the person front and centre in everything that we do, recognising people's strengths, so building on all our asset-based training, our ethnography that we've been doing, motivational interviewing. So both our own staff, our partners and everybody really making sure that they start every conversation by seeing the person and recognising their strengths and assets. Really listening deeply, and we know that's really hard to listen deeply and not come in with solutions, particularly as public servants. Many years trying to fix things. It's actually knowing what matters to our communities and supporting them, and really designing public services together. Dawn mentioned about actually how we use data, and much more around actually being data and insight led in terms of what we do as a partnership. So focusing on that data, connecting up our insight to make sure that we really understand our communities, and then connecting to our neighbourhoods. We've done lots and lots of work around place-based working with our GPs, working with our schools, doing integrated services in our neighbourhoods. But our neighbourhood work this time will be much different. We're being bolder, we're being radical. Yeah, great public services are really important, but actually what we need to do is transfer that community power into our communities, invest in our communities so they've got the infrastructure, the assets and the strength to be able to lead some of the solutions for themselves. And in some respects, we'll step away and work collaboratively and collectively together. One of the big things that Dawn and Lee mentioned was around our culture and behaviours. So do the right thing is front and centre. So making sure staff, making sure community partners, making sure everybody involved has that ability to feel protected. I talk a lot about psychological safety, but setting the conditions for great ideas to flourish, so allowing people to be innovative. And then finally, showing love and pride. There's a real commitment in this borough to show love and pride. The intrinsic motivation that we all have to make sure that we really live our values and behaviours around be accountable, be courageous, be positive and be kind are truly important to us. And that's what we talk about all of the time in terms of the way we work here. So I think as the public, private and third sector organisations in the borough, we've really come together. And Mary, I'm sure, will reference how it isn't just about the council adopting these magic ingredients, about actually collectively how we adopt them and how we work to make a real difference. And then if you just pop the next slide, please, I wanted to just then talk about the two missions. So Dawn and Lee talked about 18 months of conversations. So distill it down into two missions, I think, again, is pretty radical and quite brave, really, to sort of then say, yeah, we've had all of these thousands of conversations, but actually when it comes down to it, to make a real difference, this is what is going to actually see the foundations of how we get that real success and that real opportunity, and bring the clarity of direction that Dawn mentioned that I don't think we had across the whole of the partnership in previous years together. So these are the strong foundations, and they bring clarity to what we're trying to achieve. They are shared as well, so they are shared goals. And I think what they'll do now is really galvanise that collaborative action beyond the council. It's really a borough-wide movement. And they do explicitly focus us into thinking about fair opportunities. So that first mission there around addressing inequalities sort of recognises the unique identity of what we're trying to achieve, and really focusing on fair opportunities, breaking down the barriers of inequality that prevent people, importantly, leading happy and healthy lives. And that's the mission, that we want to really address inequalities, and facing into the fact and being honest with ourselves that in some areas across our borough, inequalities have worsened. So what do we do collectively to be proactive, to understand what those inequalities are, and do everything we can across the partnership to really tackle them? And then the second mission then is around really what we heard from all of our residents, our staff, our community organisations and our partners, that Wigan Borough is made up of 14 proud towns and neighbourhoods. And what our residents and our communities want is all of those towns and neighbourhoods to thrive. So actually, what do we do collectively to make sure that our neighbourhoods thrive? So how do we improve that at a really hyper-local level? And that's as much about the physical environment, climate environment, the physical makeup of our towns and neighbourhoods. And we know, don't we, as working, that actually that has a massive impact on the way people feel about their lives. Their health and well-being, their mental well-being is really impacted by their neighbourhood and where they live. So it's vitally important, I think, that we push hard to get those wider determinants of health really right, and support community health and wealth building, which I'll come on to. So I think to distill it down to the two missions, and the development of those missions really signals, I suppose, the council in effect becoming a bit more of a formal place shaper and convener, but actually the partnership collectively coming together. And we went over these missions, and multiple times to get them down to those 2 missions. And as Dawn said, back in September last year, collectively we launched them, a whole place recommitment to tackling the challenges we face together as a borough, and all of the partners have signed up to them. You know, head teachers, schools, the hospital trust, all of our professional sporting clubs, our community sporting clubs, our community connections group. You know, the list is long in terms of what we're trying to do. And the pink boxes there just give a sort of clue to some of the underpinning key partnership strategies that also, I suppose, act as a foundation to the missions as well. So now, just the last slide before I pass on to colleagues is, so what are the council going to do? So that's the missions for the place, but actually how does now the council contribute to those missions? So all of the partners are going away to think about how they contribute to it, but we thought as a council we really had to be really clear, and the politicians have really pushed us to make sure that collectively our cabinet and the wider politicians, to make sure that we have a really strong financial plan, to make sure we have a real strong council plan that demonstrates how we support those missions. So the 5 priority areas that we've recognised will help us deliver on the 2 missions, which the leader and our cabinet have signed up to and asked us to progress. The first is around community health and wealth building, which we've been doing a lot of work for a number of years, but really focusing in on that now as a key priority. Making sure that we continue to deliver high quality person-centred services. Using the massive opportunities from technology and AI to make sure we continually transform our operations in an ethical way, but that relentless focus, as Dawn said, on data and insight. Continuing to have a massive investment in our workforce, making sure that they have great ideas that can flourish, and really celebrating our values and behaviours. And then for me, certainly, and I think for all of our partners, that deep community engagement and that co-production with our residents and businesses. And that is really important to us, about how we do that deep community engagement. And that then has to be, as we all know, underpinned by a strong financial plan, which helps us do our transformation, that supports our local economy and our people. So I hope that's a useful summary. So thanks to Dawn and Lee. I'm going to hand over because I want us to carry on the conversation, and I know we'll be opening up some questions shortly, but that's just a quick overview of how we've got to where we've got to. Thanks, Dawn.
Thanks so much, Alison. So it seemed perfectly in terms of how we got to Progress with Unity and what it looks like. So unfortunately, we can't represent all the partners involved in Progress with Unity here today, but we're delighted to have a few to share their perspectives. So Grace, if we could spotlight all the panellists on the screen. Farai, I'd love to come to you first. So you run a voluntary sector organisation in Wigan Borough, and you are also part of the community connection group that played such a big role in shaping the new era. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit from you for 2 to 3 minutes about how you were involved in the development of Progress with Unity, and what Progress with Unity means for you in practice.
Hello, can you hear me now, Dawn? Perfect. Morning, everyone. Yeah, just like Dawn has alluded to, yeah, my name's Farai Nakanisa, co-founder of an organization called Everything Human Rights. I was also a member of the Community Connectors Group, which I think was very, very important in creating that sense of partnership and shared ownership, because it allowed the voices of the residents and the people that we work with and support from the 12 different organizations or positions that the people who were on that panel or on that group represented. So the role of ensuring that we went out to the people we support and work with to get their views and their insights on the experiences of the deal, as much as the way forward, capturing the insights of the barriers they face on a day-to-day basis, the role that the council can play, as much as the role that they themselves as residents and the responsibility they can also take in terms of contributing to what we now see today as the Progress of Unity, which is centered for me personally on the idea of tackling the inequalities that that we all face within the borough, but most with a greater focus from my perspective on barriers such as the race and disability and so socioeconomic disadvantage that captures a lot of people across our borough. So it's really, really important that that was seen and is recognized within what we're seeing today with Alison's presentation. But what I liked about it was the listen deeply element of it, because like Alison mentioned, it made sure that the voices of those people or the residents is captured and is brought through, because sometimes there's an element of we listen, but then what's the outcome? But then now we're seeing that coming to the forefront. But one of the things that I also wanted to take this opportunity was that what I realized about the whole process was that honest reflection that was allowed to come through, because the deal was seen as a success and is a success. I think it was personally, but there were a lot of things that it also highlighted, and then that was allowed to come through as well. So I think that honest reflection, the council was brave enough to allow for that to happen. And in some of those meetings, when we did have the community connectors group, there were hard discussions that and then it was brilliant that that was allowed to come through within the whole process. So yeah, I do love the fact that when I see what we have today, there is that sense of partnership and shared ownership, and we can continue with that.
Thanks so much, Farai. If you've got any questions for Farai or for any of our other panelists, please pop them in the chat and we'll pick those up in a moment. Next, I'll come to you, Mary. So you've worked at the Hospital Trust for a while and became Chief Exec last year at this big point in the development of Progress with Unity. Could you share a little bit, well, firstly introduce yourself and share a little bit about what Progress with Unity means for you and for health partners in Wigan?
Thank you. So first of all, for those that don't know me, I'm Mary Fleming, and I am the Chief Exec of Wrightington, Wigan and Lee Teaching Hospitals, here known as WWL, because it's a mouthful in itself for the full title. So WWL. So I've been here 16 years, but I'm fairly new to the Chief Exec's role, but I remember WWL absolutely working in partnership with colleagues within the local authority in the Wigan Deal, and I didn't realise it was 13 years ago. I think leaders said it was around 13 years ago, and I think, where does time go? So we've always been real advocates at WWL for changing the relationships between the public sector providers and the citizens in the way that Alison's described, seeing the person, listening and knowing the place, which is why I think Progress with Unity is a very welcome new movement for change for all of us across the Wigan Borough. For us, it gives us a very clear plan for the next 10 years, and WWL has once again been really actively involved in its development. And personally, I feel that Progress with Unity has created a real step change for my organisation and other healthcare providers to have a different relationship. And as a fairly new Chief Exec, I'm about a year in, so I think I'm still allowed to say that I'm a fairly new Chief Exec. That strengthening of that partnership working and exploring those different relationships to tackle some of the very different health and care issues that we've got is so important. And we can't get away from the finances. Alison has mentioned them. We have to get to a balanced position instead of running a deficit position, particularly within the healthcare providers, and doing it in the way that Unity with Progress described very much fits with my organisation's vision and strategy as well. And that's about creating fair opportunities and helping our towns and neighbourhoods really flourish in collaboration and in partnerships. So for me, the key priorities, and we can go into more detail, I think, in the panel discussions when we've been asked to provide examples of how they work. So for WWL, it's about local employment and education. That's a real big thing for me. As one of the biggest employers in the borough, we want to invest in local talent and investing in the borough to make the towns flourish. And that means about ensuring that we create a local workforce for local people and actually provide a vision for what the young people in particular of the Wigan Borough can actually achieve. I want consultants who are from local communities and local estates. actually advocating for local people. But also, I don't think it's about creating the traditional roles. My chief nurse is working with local authority colleagues and with the Wigan Skills and Educational Partnerships about creating roles for the future that work across health and social care. I think it's really exciting. Another priority for me is about tackling health inequalities. Lots of people have referenced it and targeting particularly local interventions. We are outliers within the Wigan Borough with regards to some of the outcomes for the patients, and I'm sure Rachel Musgrave, who's the Director of Public Health, will kind of go into those in a bit details, but we've got some practical examples of how we're taking services out of hospitals in a traditional setting and into more community settings, and how that results in better outcomes for people. And then the third element is completely transforming community services. So we've got a bespoke Wigan-wide transformation programme, which is a triumvirate agreement between secondary care providers, the hospital, local authority and the ICB, about fundamentally reducing the demand into urgent and emergency care, which aims at keeping people really healthier and longer in their own home. So those are the three key priorities that Progress with Unity has helped us to create together as a vision for the borough. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Really helpful to hear those three key priorities and how quickly the hospital and the Progress with Unity Borough-wide vision has come together. Councillor Roman, I'll come to you next. As a Cabinet member, what has Progress with Unity meant for you as both a councillor and as a Cabinet member of the council?
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you for having me today. So I am Councillor Nazia Rahman, and I am really privileged to have transformation in my portfolio, because I genuinely think that as elected members, public service delivery and public service reform now is where we can make a real difference to people's lives. And as elected members, this is what brings us very, very close to our people, and that is what matters to us as elected members. So the last transformational journey, Wigan Deal, actually served us well. It gave us that footprint of public service reform and transformation. That has served us well. So, you know, we are really, really thankful for the partners that worked with us on that, on Wigan Deal. And now we are looking forward to this Progress with Unity. The last decade, I mean, things have changed, especially after COVID, after cost of living crisis. I mean, we are still in a cost of living crisis, but things have changed. The expectations that people have from the council, from the elected members have changed. The wider determinants and the disparity of health and wealth has just come to the forefront, and our communities and the variables, the dynamics that drive our communities have definitely changed. So we think and we realize that, you know, we need to change our approach and how we deliver public services, how we engage with our partners, with our communities. So I think this is the ideal time to embark on the new journey for the next decade or so. And I think this is how we take things forward. This is where we are trying to dig deeper, you know, to engage in better ways to improve outcomes for our people. And the good thing, the most strong, the most powerful asset that we have is we are working very, very closely with our partners, with people like Mary, with people like Farai, and we are giving them an equal opportunity and equal driving seat to actually work with us, to tell us how we deliver things. So we are working, you know, as we have worked in the past, we are working very closely with our partners, with our colleges, with our university, with our voluntary and faith sector, and anyone else who wants to come forward and work with us. We are here and we are ready and we are willing to actively listen to what they have to say. So we are there. There's a lot of ambition, especially from our young people, because, you know, we are trying to get them engaged and get them on board for the next journey that we are embarking on. They have a lot to say when it comes to young people. They have a lot to say about climate change, about the environmental issues, about the job opportunities, connectivity, whether it's digital or transport. So we are actively listening to them. So I would say there's a lot of ambition, a lot of appetite to do things differently, to address the deep-rooted challenges of Wigan as a place, and we are here as councillors, as the council, as an organisation. We are here to facilitate, to empower our partners, our young people, to come up with the solutions that hopefully we will deliver. So I'm really looking forward to working with our partners and to provide that wider solutions to the problems that we all are facing. Thank you, Dawn.
Thanks so much, Councillor Raymond. So we've got a question in the chat for you, Alison, about integrating the political role of representation with direct participation, so kind of representative participatory democracy, how they come together through progress with unity. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that. Then I'll open up to other panel members about that relationship with local people. What does that mean for your organisation? What does listening look like? And what will shift for local people through progress with unity? So Alison, over to you first.
Thanks, Dawn. We're all tapping away in the chat box trying to answer all the questions, so you're probably getting multiple responses, everyone, to different questions. So hopefully doing our best. I can see that one came in. Do you know, it's probably, I'm happy to give my view, but I think it's probably important for the leader and Naz to give their view, and Councillor Raymond, because obviously they're the leading edge and our community representatives. But I think it's part of the conversation that, you know, first and foremost, our politicians are part of their communities, so they are actively involved in deep community conversations. So for us, this is part of what they've always done, really, in terms of making sure that communities do have a say in what's happening around them. They do, you know, as Farai said, that we have those open and honest conversations. So it's important that that communities get involved, and I think Naz and the leader will say that actually that direct participation is something that we've been doing for some time, but I think we are now trying to be more purposeful about it in terms of what that actually means, particularly around investment decisions, particularly around shifting resources into communities, you know, really thinking about actually what that means and the impact on public services. So it's quite a radical and bold approach to actually think differently about how we do some of our neighbourhood working, and transfer some of that community power. And I think the politicians really want that to happen, because they see that it contributes so well to their role as politicians and as community activists. But if you don't mind, Dawn, it might be worthwhile just the leader or Councillor Raymond perhaps giving their quick view on that.
Yeah, of course. Who wants to jump in?
Yeah, can I just support what Alison said? And I think it's very important. I think we set out right at the beginning of this conversation today, that partnership working is massive. Councils cannot do this on their own. It is that community involvement, it is that partnership involvement, and I think that's where we've even put the foot down since the deal. We've really progressed that and really pushed that as an important part of what we are and where we are as a council, because it's not just about the council will do this or the council will tell you what we're going to do. It's engaging with everybody to deliver that. And I think that's the ethos that we've tried to create over a number of years now, where people's voice is important to us in terms of what we do and what we deliver. And I think we can see that from how can I put it, the people who want to be involved with progress with unity from our community groups, people and partners who want to be involved, who don't want to sit in an insular world where they just go their way and we go our way. It's so important to us, and it's an ethos I would say to everyone, this is what you need to get involved in, and this is how you bring communities to play a part in it, because they have such an input and a massive input into what we do, and we do that with our staff as well. Probably 80 or 90% of our staff live in the borough, and the people we serve are the people that Murray's team serve up the hospital. It's the people who the police get involved with. It's the people with our community partnerships get involved in, and it's so important to us in terms of where we see the vision for this borough. And I think that comes out it comes out really so much so now with progress with unity and the new era. It's unreal, and we don't want to hold it back. We want to let it go. We want to make sure that what we deliver is right, and you can't do that without engaging with your partners and the community in general. Okay.
Thanks, all of you.
Thanks, Dawn. Also, I know Councillor Cunliffe, the deputy leader's on. I know Councillor Raymond might to come in, and Councillor Cunliffe's on a further panel, so he might want to reference that when he's speaking a bit later as well. Thanks,
Brilliant.
Dawn.
So, Councillor Raymond, did you want to come in, and then Fry, I'll come to you.
Just wanted to echo what Leader has already said. But I think, you know, if we really want to, I really want to summarise it. There are two factors. One is a push factor and one is a pull factor. So push factor comes from all the limitations that we are facing in local government at the moment, the constraints, the financial constraints, the political landscape, you know, the broader issues that we are facing. I think they are pushing us to actually engage deeper within our communities, because we all know, somehow we all know that public services are not fit for purpose anymore. They were designed for a world that is not here anymore. The world has completely changed. People's needs have changed. So that is the push factor that is pushing us to engage in different ways with our communities. And there is also a pull factor, which is very, very unique to Wigan, that we want to do things with our people. We want to take them on board. We want to work with our partners rather than telling them what to do and, you know, what our services mean to them and what they should mean to them. We are actually asking them to drive this change, to drive this transformation. So I think this is where we want to, and we really, really want to listen to them and engage deeper within our communities. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. Fry, I'll bring you in now.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to contribute for more of an example as well of what Alison and the councillors and the leader have just mentioned, in the sense that we've got the quality strategy that's being run at the moment, and then that, in a sense, how it's being handled, in the sense the engagement element of it is being run by your VCFSC organizations that have come forward with that, and are the ones who are running that engagement to ensure that the people's voices, the residents' voices, is heard and is brought forward within that, so that when the equality strategy itself, which touches on all the public services and what the services should mean and how they should be run, is being handled by the community. The council is allowing for that to happen. So I think that relationship, it is being seen with the progress of unity by handing over that task to community organizations to lead on that, and the council then to support that, the running of that and the implementation of it, to shape the new equality policy for the next 3 to 5 years. So I think that's a wonderful example of that actually happening in practice.
Thanks so much, Fry. And I think that really illustrates one of the key findings of the engagement, which is how can the council be more conscious of its power, where it really needs to step in, but also where it needs to step back, create space for others, play that enabling role rather than doing everything itself. Thanks for sharing that. So at this point, I wanted to bring in 2 more panellists, and we're going to get into some specific examples. We'll also try and pick up some questions in the chat, but I'd like to welcome Rachel Musgrave, Director of Public Health at Wigan Council, and Councillor Cunliffe, Deputy Leader of Wigan Council. We'll open up for lots of questions in a moment, but this section we really kind of try and dig deeper into practical implementation. What does it look like in practice to deliver progress with unity, to take this mission-based partnership approach? Fry has just given us a really great example to get us started there. But Rachel, can I come to you? How have you been involved in progress with unity, and what does it mean for your day-to-day as Director of Public Health?
Thanks, Dawn. And as you can imagine, the missions of Progress with Unity are in effect a dream ticket for a Director of Public Health, given that the missions are the critical foundations for a healthy and happier population, and everything that comes with good health outcomes across our local communities. And I think we've talked quite a bit on this call today, and everybody probably on the call will be familiar with the conditions that exist right across the country in terms of that fallout from the pandemic and the reducing life expectancy, the enduring economic challenges. And that really plays out in our data as it does in lots of places across the country. We see significant differences in health outcomes right across the population, and the impacts that has for our communities, and the way in which people engage and access services is as a consequence quite different. And I think that's what's critically important about the missions, actually. So for us, this enables us to focus on our bespoke approach and response in the same way that we see those differences in terms of people's experiences and the data. By using the missions, we've got a way to frame the way we focus and do things in place across communities differently, reflecting what residents tell us, but also what the data shows us, rather than doing the same thing everywhere and expecting different results or the same results in places. I think as we transition from the important work to obviously create the missions as a collective partnership and turn that into action. I think there's lots of examples we're starting to see, I think, both from the strategies that underpin the missions, but that right through in terms of how we deliver services on the ground. And I know Mary alluded to some of this work, but just to kind of bring some of that to life, I suppose, in terms of the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy, which is obviously a key plank of how we will deliver across those range of wider determinants of health through to healthcare services in our communities. The pillars of that strategy which help us to deliver the missions are really centred around some of those examples in terms of our health and skills workforce being a pipeline of opportunity for local people, as well as building a resilient workforce and addressing some of those fundamental economic inequalities, providing jobs, employment and careers for local people. We're also doing quite a bit of work through that strategy about the conditions in place. So again, delivering on those missions. How do our plans actually pivot and respond to the missions in terms of different communities and the outcomes and experiences of peoples that live there? So they're some of the, I suppose, strategic responses to deliver the missions. In terms of our ways of working, Mary's just alluded to, in quite a unique partnership, Mary and I chair the NHS Local System Delivery Board, which I think really is a great example of the missions in practice in terms of the way we work in partnership. So that end-to-end approach from prevention through to treatment, but with that sharper focus on inequality. So some of the examples that Mary alluded to is how we've used our data that shows us there's a particular community that may be experiencing long-term poor health outcomes, but also using services in a particular way. That takes us then into a conversation. And I think our experience has been really sitting on our hands as a group of partners and service deliverers from the voluntary sector, from the health service, from public health, from other council departments, to listen to what our communities are telling us works. And then we've got some amazing examples where primary care and our secondary care colleagues have worked together to actually then really design a response to that responds to a particular population, rather than expecting people to go to a service or take out those barriers to enable that access in a different way. And then a further example, I think, of the work that we're doing is there are two very specific service but community examples around our work to improve our health improvement offer for communities. So I think traditionally in the past, a lot of places will have had very individual services that look at, if you like, the causes of they're not tackling the causes of the causes, actually. They're looking at the impacts of those causes. So people's experiences in terms of weight, smoking, alcohol, gambling, but actually it's the causes of the causes that our residents are telling us are the things that matter to them. So in terms of our health improvement approach, how do we flex that so that we've got an offer for everyone that responds to the challenges in different places? Alongside that, not only that being a service delivery response, but actually activating the voluntary and community sector approaches in those communities. So where we know there are trusted partners in places who have a better offer or a different offer that works entirely for the people that live there, as well as our offer as a council or as an NHS in place. We're also looking at our approach to mental health and wellbeing, again, recognising that there has been demand across the population for services, but actually we know that a lot of that is rooted in the conditions and the places in which people live and their ability to be able to do everything from get out the house because the streetlights are working, through to having someone to talk to, someone to connect with, to have fun, to play, and really trying to kind of unlock the huge potential that exists in our VCF assets in local communities to help us to do some of that. So that's a real, I think, range of examples across the spectrum of the work that we're doing that really illustrates the depth and breadth of how the missions, I suppose, rewire our DNA and the way that we work. And it is early days, but I think we've already got some amazing, brilliant examples of how we're doing that. And hopefully that just gives you a small flavour of that today.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And I just wanted, someone's pointed out to me, we haven't talked about the Progress with Unity crest and the anniversary. So I just wondered, Alison, did you want to briefly talk to that before we carry on, just to explain the significance of Progress with Unity, the crest and the borough's anniversary?
Sure can, Dawn. Yeah, the leader might want to say something, or some of our members too, but we had our 50-year anniversary last year. And we also have had our crest around for many years, and the two seem to come together in some sort of magic happened when we realised that actually the whole of the crest, if you look at the history of our crest, celebrates the whole of the borough coming together. So the 14 proud towns and neighbourhoods that we've talked about, it just felt so symbolic that actually it was about a coming together of all parts of the borough, our 50-year anniversary. The new era work. And then actually, if you fundamentally think about the deep symbolic nature of what Progress with Unity actually means, it just felt right. So we talked to partners, we talked to residents, Varai, Mary, everybody was involved. And it just felt at a moment in time where we had to grasp it. And I think the other important thing about it, which the leader might say, is it's also about, I think one of the important things is celebrating heritage, but also looking forward. And for us, it did both of those things. I think for the borough, it's about celebrating what's gone before and understanding the history and the proud heritage that we've got as a place, but also then it really lending itself to the opportunities for the future and what that means to collectively come together. And in my personal opinion, now more than ever, actually what we're trying to do is give hope and optimism for our residents, for our families, for our young people, as Rachel's talked about. And for me, that strapline Progress with Unity gives that hope and optimism more than anything else that we could have dreamt up or asked someone to dream up for us. So David might want to say a few things, but that's what it means to me personally and all of us.
Yeah, just picking up on what Alison said, and when people ask the question, how do you pull all this together? Believe you me, the journey since 1974, 75 onwards has always been a challenge, because you bring in 14 very proud towns together and put them under the badge of Wigan. And I can believe you me, in certain parts of the borough, people kind of cringe when you say you're now in Wigan. But they've all bought into it, and that's what Progress with Unity is about. It's very symbolic for us. We are in that 50th municipal year of joining all these towns together, and in terms of what we deliver. And because of that grit and determination within the 14 towns, it certainly has made a big difference in who we are today. And it's something that we should be proud of. And I think when they must have sat down in 1974 and onwards to think of what motto shall we use, I think it was very clear that Progress with Unity was the right one. And I think we are seeing that more so today than ever. We're certainly seeing it with the partnerships that we've talked about this morning. And certainly when you get the rugby teams of Wigan Warriors and Lee Leopards in the same room, sat on the same table, talking to 450 school children, you realise that Progress with Unity is making great strides. So it is something we're proud of. And it is something that carries a lot of significance in who we are and where we want to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Molyneux. Sorry, the bit of a segue, but when I saw that crest in the background, I thought we should explain it. So, Councillor Cunliffe, I'll come to you next. It would be great if you can introduce yourself. And we've got a question in the chat about sharing responsibility and accountability with community organisations as you empower them to do more. I know this is a particular passion of yours. So yeah, it'd be great to hear your response to that question as well.
Okay, so I'm Councillor Keith Conliffe. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Council, David's deputy there. And I've had the portfolio for health and adult social care for 17 years. And of course, in terms of the deal and the development of the deal, a lot of the principles, behaviours and everything were developed primarily in adult social care initially, because I think Progress with Unity is very similar to the deal. I mean, initially the deal was basically just a single sheet of paper saying, we will, you will. But all that developed, it evolved, it changed through, you know, a number of people's interactions with it and a number of departments' interactions with it. And Progress with Unity is exactly the same. I mean, I think as David was just saying, Progress with Unity 50 years ago was the 14 towns coming together to form Wigan Borough. I think now Progress with Unity is what we're seeing is about all the partners, the communities, the 320,000 people that live in Wigan coming together to share missions and objectives around that. And that's really been a big thing for us. And Progress with Unity isn't a corporate strategy that will sit in a lever arch file on a shelf and nobody will ever look at it. It's actually something that is living, that is breathing, that will develop, will be evolved and change over time. And how will it change? Not because the council change it. Any partner doing different things, any community group, any business, the whole thing is there to be developed and changed along. So what Progress with Unity looks like in 5-10 years' time, I haven't a clue, because it won't be what I want, it'll be what we as a borough want. And what I think we've seen over the last year or so is that real coming together of all the partners that have been involved in Progress with Unity and the development of the new era. And so the business consortium, for instance, businesses are actually seeing their role in adding to the social value of the borough around creating apprenticeships, employment opportunities, providing skills, providing support for voluntary organisations. And one of the things that I think we really didn't do all that well under the deal was to engage with the community and voluntary sector as equal partners. I think the community and voluntary sector, I mean, many years ago when the deal started, I just said, facing austerity, we're having less staff, less money available and less resource, but actually there's a huge resource that we've never harnessed, and that was the strength of the community and the 329,000 people here. And so whilst we did that, it was very much an unequal partnership between the council and the voluntary sector. And I think what we're moving towards is ensuring that the community and voluntary sector are equal partners, can influence and change things, that we together, as all the organisations, council, NHS, business, work together with the community sector as equal partners, because what they need is sustainability, viability going forward for the tremendous work they do. And the other thing that is really important is that, you know, people are engaged in communities and doing things and changing things and making things different in their community, not because we're telling them. We probably have no involvement at all in them or anybody else. So it's harnessing that energy, that involvement and commitment to the communities that we need to harness. And that means, like I say, working with them as equal partners, but ensuring the viability and sustainability. And the big involvement for me is interesting, because I was at Business Consortium not long ago, where businesses are actively supporting community groups in their area. And I don't just mean by financial support. I mean offering support in kind, social value. If you're a small community run organisation, you know, you're probably not all that familiar with bookkeeping, accountancy, human resources. Yet all of us, bigger businesses, all of us have finance departments, you know, and the opportunity to input in kind to support community groups is really important. And I know a while ago, the council invested a bit of money for each of the 14 towns in terms of environmental improvements, and we invested that. And I remember getting a presentation on what we'd done in the various areas. And I asked the question, but the work they'd done, I mean, Environmental Services said we went into Atherton and we cleared up this area, and I just said, is that what the people wanted, or is that what you decided in the in the depot they wanted? And so actually to give people the opportunity to do different things is really important, because in terms of environmental improvements in Atherton, I live in Leigh. I'm not bothered what environmental improvements take place in Atherton, but I'm sure the people of Atherton are very concerned about what environmental improvements. So actually that deeper, that greater engagement and that deeper co-production is really important, and that's coming out very strongly. The other thing I think that's really important is giving freedom and permission for staff right across the council and right across our partners to do things differently, to be innovative, to try different things out. And that's really important. One of the things I usually say at our staff engagement sessions in adult social care is, I've never failed at anything. I've either succeeded or learned. And so, to give people, people don't believe you at first. You have to develop that culture throughout. And I think it took a significant amount of time through the deal to change that culture. But I think from what people experience and what people see, then they take great delight in bringing their ideas, because we can't just have a system that is run by ideas at the top trickling down. Actually, the people with the most ideas are probably the people on the front line, the people in communities, the people engaging with communities. And so they are probably the ones who know how to improve things, how to do things better and all that. And the 6 things that Alison highlighted at the front are the main platform for getting through the changes that are required and the changes we need to meet, because this is a situation where we all need to get involved. And like I say, whereas the deal was seen as council, this is around the whole borough approach, and that place-based approach across the whole borough is really starting to play dividends, and the commitment of everybody that's involved is really good.
Thanks so much, Councillor Cunliffe. You've got a really wide-ranging view of how this impacts all different parts of the system, and particularly businesses, voluntary community faith and social enterprise sector. I just want to make sure that we get to hear from Mary and Farai again before we close. So, Mary, there was that question earlier about sharing responsibility and accountability, and I'm really interested from a health perspective. Obviously, you've got so many national and regional drivers. How do you kind of balance the Progress with Unity, the Wigan Borough ambitions with all of your other accountabilities and responsibilities?
Alison and I were talking about this not very long ago, because there are 2 separate governance frameworks, I think it's fair to say, around the NHS and everything that that comes with that, and the the new government being in place, and the left shifts that we are absolutely aligned to. And I think Progress with Unity, we were doing that before the 3 left shifts came out, to be honest. So we wanted to move from a prevention to treatment. We wanted to move from acute to community. And that is fundamentally one of the focuses that we've got. But I think there is a danger that some of the performance frameworks can be a little bit divisive, to be honest. And that's where the partnership working and having a joined vision, and a collaborative working really comes into the fore. And you have to be committed. If you are not committed, then there is a danger that you will, it becomes very, very divisive. So I noticed one of the comments that went in the chat box around, do you have a stable population? And somebody responded by saying, well, actually, we've got the fastest ageing population within the Greater Manchester ICB. We've also got the lowest general and acute bed base for a hospital based on per head of population in comparison with the whole of the with Greater Manchester and the Northern region, and probably one of the lowest in the country. Now, it'd be really easy to sit here and say, right, we want more general and acute beds. But actually, that is absolutely not the right answer, because all we would do is put people in those beds and keep them there for a very, very long time and not address what the problem is. And 70% of the staff that 70% of the staff that are employed in the hospital actually work in the Wigan Borough, and through their feedback, they're telling us that that is definitely not the services that we need to provide. So I think, you know, Alison and I sat down with our leaders under the Progress with Unity umbrella around addressing inequalities and you know, working with neighbourhoods, flourishing with neighbourhoods, through the work that Rachel's just talked about, going out into the community, listening to the community, what is really important for them and why they're turning up to A&E time and time again. It's absolutely nothing to do with health. Surprise, surprise. It's actually the environment in which they live that they need support with, which will allow them to make better choices in the future. So it's all of that coming together under Progress with Unity, and actually us holding our nerve and holding the line and saying we've got programmes of work that actually will deliver better outcomes for residents in the future, and whilst managing those very short term, what I call hard performance outputs. So I think, you know, the Wigan Borough, when I look around, I think the Wigan Borough is really streets ahead of other places with regards to fundamentally transforming health and care services. And I think we've got, Alison, we've got a bespoke programme, haven't we, with the Wigan Borough? We're in a unique position because it's a tripartite agreement between ourselves, the local authority and the ICB to fund a really, really exciting transformation programme. And I don't think we would have got that deal done had we not had those strong relationships and those strong partnership working. So there is accountability, because we are an NHS organisation to the public through NHS England, but actually being able to go together as a locality to say to NHS England and the Department of Health, actually, these are the programmes of work that are really important to us. These are the transformation that we want to do, and this is the outcome it's going to deliver, is really puts you in a very, very strong or a stronger position.
Thanks so much, Mary. I think that would be really interesting to people how you're navigating those dynamics, and your phrase holding our nerve really stuck out. And I guess my experience of partnership is when you're doing things collectively, it's so much easier to hold your nerve, to give each other that strength to bolster through those tricky decisions and moments. So thanks for sharing that. Finally, I'm conscious of time, but Freya, I just wanted to give you a chance. There's loads of conversation in the chat about the voluntary community faith and social enterprise sector. Thinking of that question about accountability and responsibility, like what does it look like for you to have a more equal partnership? And you've given one example. Are there any other thoughts you've got about an equal partnership that can translate to more benefits for residents?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I mean, I'm personally under no illusion, and I think we all should have that position of the fact that when we are talking about the VCFSC sector, it's in Wigan, it's large, over 1,000 of these organizations that work together, that look to collaborate and tackle inequalities together. They've all got a unique positioning and a role to play, which was so evident in how we all came together during COVID to work with the council, to work with the health sector in trying to address the inequalities and the issues that were happening at that time. But it's building on that, from my perspective. It's building that trust that was developed. The partnership is there now. The networks into all the different sectors is there, but we need to harness that and then build the trust so that we understand that we want to tackle this together in terms of implementing Progress to Unity. I mean, I know we're at the starting point. How it's all going to end, like Councillor Keith Cunliffe had mentioned, how it's all going to end after the next 10 years, who knows? But whatever that is, if it's been built through trust and collaboration and working together and understanding that we've all got a role to play, and moving away from competing for services or competing for delivery, but just working on all the strengths that we do have, the core competencies that each organization has. I think from my perspective, that's what Progress Unity as a success would look for me. And but underlined by that thing of working as equal partners and the trust. To me, that's what should come to the forefront for me personally. But lastly, I also wanted to touch on the fact that, you know, when it came to the CCG coming together, there was that understanding that there are a lot of organizations out there. So there was that additional reach that was made within those organizations, also reaching out when we're doing the surveys, when we're trying to find the resident voices, how we're linked into organizations beyond ourselves with that understanding. I think one of the major examples that I really like was one of the colleagues who was in the CCGs on the tenants group went and sat in a pub, you know, and had those conversations, you know, with people coming in an informal setting, but that allow people to be honest, and they felt comfortable in that space to share their views. So it's going out to those residents, and that's what was happening and should continue happening, because it's work in progress.
Thanks so much, Fry. I think you've summed up perfectly so much of what we've covered there. Trust, collaboration, we've all got a role to play. And I think this discussion has really showed, you know, how we're all figuring out what that role is, stepping into it, testing. And I think another thing I've really appreciated is that commitment to learning. Not going to get it all right first time, but that constant commitment to learning, reflecting, adapting together. Thank you so much to our panelists. Just a shame we couldn't have asked you more questions, because there's so much depth to explore, but I'm sure this won't be the last of these conversations. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. And at this point in the agenda, we're going to switch slightly to a broader national perspective. So Joan, I spotted you popped in the chat a question about what's the learning for other public services. So we're going to have a panel discussion now, which starts to explore what Wigan's learning means on a national stage and what the potential is for a broader joined up movement for change across public services. So I'm pleased to hand over to Anna Randall, former Chief Executive of Collaborate and also co-author of this report. So over to you, Anna.
Thanks so much, Dawn, and good morning, everyone. So as Dawn said, we've heard from many of the brilliant partners in Wigan this morning about this journey that the borough's been on towards progress with unity. And we're going to hear now some reactions and responses from 3 people from outside of Wigan Borough who are going to reflect on what they've heard, what this means to them in the context that they're in, and also what Wigan's journey continues to mean for the wider movement for change across public services. So I'm delighted to introduce Dan Wellings, who is the Senior Fellow at the King's Fund and one of the original authors of the King's Fund report about the Wigan Deal back in 2019, which are the report that we're launching today in some ways updates. Also Claire Taylor, the Chief Operating Officer at Sheffield Council, who Collaborate are also working with at the moment as they seek to build a citywide approach to achieving their new Sheffield City goals. So lots of opportunities for learning there. And finally, Nick Kimber, who has the brilliant task of working out how government can facilitate more of this sort of reform at a local level. Nick's currently in the Cabinet Office. And so I'm going to turn first to Dan, and if each of you could just take 4 or 5 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes for me to ask you some follow-up questions in response to what you said. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks very much, everyone. I suppose my first reflection, Anna, was related to what Dawn said at the start, which was when Wigan first approached Collaborate, there was a, well, why are you doing this? And I suppose I was equally surprised, but I really shouldn't have been, because actually the work we did in 2019 documenting the approach Wigan was taking, one of the most important things that we found there was just the ability to say what you weren't getting right at the time or where you could improve. I think that commodity is in short supply in public services, and it's so important to be able to say, well, what are we not doing well? And we'll come on to some of the reasons why it's difficult to have that conversation. But I always remember sharing the Wigan report with someone that I've worked with over a number of years and I really have a lot of time for. And I shared it with her and she read it and I met up and I said, well, what do you think? And she said, oh, it's just common sense. They just apply common sense to problems. And then you realize the absence of common sense in much of what we can do in response to some of these challenges. So it's been really brilliant to hear everything that we heard today. I think I'll reflect on a few things. There's a piece of work that I'm going to reflect on that we've done recently in Grenfell, which I will try and talk a little bit about, around how I had a lot of the work in Wigan in my mind whilst we were doing that work, and why this work, the way of working, which is so clearly embedded throughout everything that we've heard today, is so important. And then I will reflect a little bit on Mary's challenge around that national, local, and those hard performance outputs, and what I think it means for how we need to challenge both what we're measured on and how government works with local areas as well. I think it's a really useful discussion to have. So the first thing I think is that when we spent the time in Wigan back in 2018, writing up in 2019, I suppose as an author of that report and doing the work, every day we just kept thinking, this can't be right. There's so much optimism and hope in this thing. At a time when we were speaking to other systems, that wasn't the case. And my colleague Chris talked about rekindling hope and being very honest about some of the challenges that were being faced. And that's come out again, I think, very clearly today. We recently have done a piece of work looking at the health and care response to Grenfell, and I'll try and explain why I think that's really important, because people will be aware of the tragic circumstances around Grenfell and what led up to that. That was a community that was silenced and ignored for a long period of time in advance of that tragedy. In response to that tragedy, it was the community that stepped in largely and delivered services that people needed. When public services then did come into play, with all the best intentions, it was the community that had to step in and say, that isn't working. So a really tangible example of that is that the NHS rolled out 11,000 screen and treat programs with very, very good intentions. It wasn't done in any way, thinking it was the wrong thing to do. It was nice approved guidelines. And what quickly became clear was that they were phoning people up who were survivors or bereaved or living in the local area. And if you go to Grenfell, you can just feel that living in that local area, particularly at the time, but still now with everything around the tower, is a hugely challenging experience to be having. And they did the screen and treat programs, but they were cold calling people. And they were cold calling people and asking them questions around things like, do you feel suicidal? There was a lack of understanding of, you talked earlier on about starting with the person, that a large proportion of people who were affected were from a Muslim background. There was very little understanding of what that means in terms of how you handle death, what that means in terms of faith. And it was the community at that point that stepped in and said, well, what you're doing isn't working. And that's difficult, I think, particularly, and I'll talk about the NHS here a little bit, is that that's often difficult for the NHS to hear. So that local system had to start working differently around what they heard. And they did that with mixed success. There were some organisations that were willing to approach this with humility to understand what they weren't doing. And there were some organisations that really couldn't let go of that power. The other thing I'd say, which is progress through unity, is that we talk a lot about engagement or co-production or involvement, is that what was, everyone started to engage furiously with the community. There was almost an industry of engagement went on, but everyone was doing it differently. Everyone was doing it separately. And I think one of the key things I've learned from today is that because you've got everyone here represented, that was the thing that we learned in Wigan. You were sat at tables where everyone who is working on behalf of that local population is listening together and then working together on what, and that's where cost effectiveness comes in. So that brings me to my last point, which is around Mary's point. The current drive from government is on things like waiting lists. But what's really interesting for me is that we almost think about this way of working, which has been talked about today, and waiting lists as a separate area. But actually, if you look at work like the work that's been done in Sussex, where they've had community asset-based conversations with people, they took 500 people off their waiting list, and they had asset-based conversations about different ways that they might want to be receiving care. They took 50% of people off that waiting list. So I think Mary's right that too often we've got roughly 6.4 million people wait on a waiting list, but potentially some of them are waiting in the wrong queue for the wrong thing. And I think that's what this approach will start to uncover. And it's great to see. I am focused on Mary because an acute trust being involved in this is so important because that is where those hard performance outputs are. So I suppose that's my final point, Anna, which is that We, by those of us, I mean, really think this way of working is the solution to the current challenges that we face, need to be also pushing upwards to say, actually, you're setting us targets, but it's the classic thing of hitting the target but missing the point. So there's a real challenge for government here on these 3 shifts which are being advocated to think about how do you measure those, and how do you measure those in ways that celebrates this way of working and celebrates that partnership. And I think back in 2019, we finished that report with a key question is whether a culture in which managers spend their time looking up to national bodies and regulators rather than out to the populations they serve can make meaningful progress towards asset-based ways of working. So I think for me, that is still the challenge. So I'll stop there, Anna, but hopefully some helpful reflections.
Yeah, that's fab. Thank you, Dan. And yeah, this question that we asked right at the start, why are you doing this? From the outside, the Wigan Deal has been such a kind of beacon of hope and positivity around what's possible in terms of local place-based public service reform, as documented in your original report. And I think the thing that comes through what we've heard so strongly today, and it's reflected in what you just said, is that Wigan starts with, well, what's right for us in Wigan, what's right for the place, what's right for the community here, and actually those behaviours of being accountable, being brave, was what actually enabled Wigan to take a hard look at something that had such a huge impact and that had been so successful, and which was very loved and still is in some ways in Wigan, but actually say, well, what needs to change, what's changed around us, and as Alison said right at the beginning, where do we actually need to go further? So thank you. Hopefully we'll be able to come back to you in a moment, but I'm going to turn now to Claire, Chief Operating Officer at Sheffield City Council. And I think, Claire, you're going to share a little bit of the journey that Sheffield are on and how this relates to Wigan's own work.
Absolutely, Anne. Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you, Wigan. Thank you, Collaborate. Hopefully this is the beginning of a bit of a network, actually. It's such a pleasure to be here and share experiences and be brave enough, actually, to talk about what's working well and our even better if. So I've got about 4 slides. You will see a serious amount of commonality in the approaches. My major message is probably the how is as important as anything else, since the how we work together. You'll also notice no council logos on my slide deck. These are actually slides that have been developed by our City Goals transition team. So the council has actually made some really serious choices in how it goes about this work, in terms of how it shows up and working much more collaboratively. Because if I had a 6th slide to show you, it would be a little bit about the challenges of system leadership. So first slide is essentially Sheffield stories. So as part of the development work around the city goals, we have co-produced 6 Sheffield stories. They're at the top of the screen right now. They're the stories that we want to tell as a city about our future. And they're underpinned by a series of goals and problem statements around how we want to work together. Like Wigan, like many of us, these are based on what I would really hope would be considered deep community engagement. So the production of this framework has been, it took a long time, 1,500 responses, 28 deep listening workshops, 17 community engagement sessions, stats and sentiment cards. So this sense about resetting and reimagining what's possible for our city has been core to this dialogue, really, really similar actually to what colleagues have been talking about. So we talk about Sheffield stories as part of our foundation. The next slide that I wanted to talk about was about new leadership approaches. And again, previous slide. What have we committed to? So new leadership models. What's really interesting here is you'll see some words on the screen: stewardship circle, city partnership board, as part of our approach to engaging and reimagining our partnership networks. Actually, the City Partnership Board commissioned the City Goals work, and their final act was to wind themselves up as a board and hand over to a new architecture within the city. So a sense that we're working together really differently to realise and live the city goals and the Sheffield stories has been really a really significant part of our work. So again, like colleagues in Wigan, this is a sense about relationships and trust, and that stewardship circle who stewarded the development of the goals and the engagement processes is actually not a council-led board or group. So very much trialling and testing new ways of showing up in the city. So my next slide is about, and I think this one was really interesting. Dan said something in his reflections about top-down targets and moving, missing the mark and hitting the target. And I think there's a lot to learn and recognise in that. So the way in which Sheffield has chosen to bring the goals to life is around these kind of work streams. And these have been led and established by a transition team, again, not led by the City Council. Just on this is a real attempt at moving away from a kind of targets and deliverology approach, a board that receives lots of presentations about the challenges, and really working hard to create a culture, a sense of trust, strong relationships that enable things to happen that aren't all controlled, which is, I guess, one of the reasons why systems leadership is so important. The two blocks on this that I'd point out, neighbourhood conversations. So this only works, reflecting Wigan's point again, only works with ongoing dialogue. It can't be a one and done. And then measuring what matters. So we are also doing some fairly innovative work on a set of measurements for the city about what we understand success to be. They're aligned with our stories rather than centrally driven targets. So my last slide is really a reflection on leadership. So here we can see that Sheffield's working as a system to embed three kind of elements to its partnership and city goals work. And that's a leadership function that is generally dispersed across the city. And that's one of the reasons why it's challenging. We're working with individuals and groups and partners that are all sovereign in their own spaces. So how do you bring people together and create that collaborative sense of vision and culture across that partnership? And actually Anna's helping us with that at the moment. We're working on an independent secretariat. We're very keen as a city and as a city council that this isn't seen as a council activity. Nonetheless, our convening role is really important. So working in an environment where we take accountability for convening, but also not hold that power too close is really key. And the last thing that I'd mention in terms of the leadership is really making sure there is quality space for voice and engagement, and not falling into the trap of all of the anchor institutions doing this separately and trying to accommodate that together. And that's, again, another one of the pieces of work that we're looking at. So huge amounts of commonality. I'm going to stop there, but I'm super happy to ask any questions and share any of our lessons going forward. Thanks, Anna.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Claire. I just think it's so exciting listening to you and Wigan colleagues speak, because it just shows what is possible, and in terms of kind of reinventing how things work locally. This is incredibly inspirational. So finally, over to you, Nick. What do you hear when you listen to our colleagues from Sheffield and from Wigan? And how does this all sound in terms of where you're sitting now in central government?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Tough act going last, I think. It's been like an incredibly rich morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Director of Public Service Reform in Cabinet, but really I'm a place and local government person. So I'm on secondment from Camden Council, and I've spent sort of 15 years working in local government, most of it at Camden, which I think is a place with a sort of deep affinity with the work of Wigan. I think there's been lots of mutual admiration and learning over the years between the two places. So I guess my sort of remarks and reflections come from those two places, Camden and Place, and a new and sometimes baffling position in central government, trying to kind of figure it all out. But there's probably three things that I'd want to say. One is about the power of story and the power of language. I think the second is about that theme of movement building. And the third is about leadership. So themes that have come up throughout the day, but hopefully something kind of new to offer within that. I guess on the first, the deal and progress with Unity, to me, are both stories. And humans like run on narrative. It provides purpose. It's the thing that ultimately enables them to act. And I always think that kind of real strategy isn't about like an evidence base or a set of disciplined work streams, important though those things are. It's about a chief executive or a social worker or a procurement officer who knows what to do in the moment when something comes up. Do I do this or do I do that? And so the test of a strategy, a story, a vision is, does it enable those people in that moment to decide between different courses of action? And then on language, I think the language that's been used today is really powerful. It's also relatively unusual, I think, in the public sector still. So you hear words today and in the document around things like love and kindness and empathy. And I think those words belong alongside a series of words that we are more commonly used in the public sector around grip and value for money. But our mainstream culture tends to reject the first set of words and embrace the latter sense of words, and sees them as being soft, but they're anything but that. I think they're kind of the hardest words to use in some ways. And normalizing them is really important. Saying why they're important and using them unashamedly, I think, is really key. The second thing's about movement. So I think everyone on the call would reflect that the last 15 years in the public sector have been quite tough. But there has been another story. So I've spent those 15 years in local government and I have not found them joyless places. I found the time that I spent in public services to be really creative and exciting, and reform has been happening in places like Wigan, in places like Camden, in places like Gateshead, in places like Leeds, in places like Sheffield. So far better to have a coherent national direction, but places and public servants in places, in which I include council officers, the VCS, the health system, get on with things. So they don't need permission. I think we do get on with things, and the thing that I think's come up in the chat and the thing that we need to lean into is the things that can only be changed in SW1. There's 1.7 million postcodes in the UK. That's where the work needs to happen. That's where the reform needs to happen. But there's one postcode in the centre where there are some keys to important parts, and it's only through reform there that the depth and breadth of the work that we would recognise that's happening already can kind of really be unleashed. So I think there is something about that movement being both at the local level, so neighbourhood and locality, at sort of place level, but also seeing it as a central and local partnership. So how do we make that movement something that is shared by change agents at different tiers of government who are all working kind of collaboratively? And then the last point I'd make is about leadership. So I think the thing that characterises all of those places that I admire, including Wigan, is the quality of leadership, and quite a diverse range of leadership, from the political leadership of people like David, chief exec leadership of people like Alison, but directors of finance, I think, are always incredibly important in terms of being able to hold risk across financial cycles. And it's a particular type of leadership. So it is like humble, it is curious. It's the reason we're here today, is the humility displayed by Wigan, and a confidence to say sometimes that I don't know or I need help, and the ability to do the sort of simultaneous translation that you need to do across different systems. To be able to work across silos, you need to be able to talk the language of health, talk the language of a local authority, talk the language of the VCS, understand each other's language, and be able to kind of recognise the different pressures that are pulling on people and sort of find ways around that. And then I think the very last thing I'd say about that is the ability to reconcile the business as usual, the grit and the innovation. Sometimes I think those things are seen as binaries, as sort of oppositions. You must do one or you must do the other. That hasn't really been my experience. So certainly in Camden, the sort of relational practice that is a feature of our children's services is the thing that has saved us 19 million pounds off the bottom line. So it's words like love and empathy and the depth of relational and systemic practice which have really made a difference to our bottom line. So I don't see the novel, the innovation necessarily as something that is in opposition to business as usual. I think we need to increasingly see those things as part of one of the same.
Thank you so much, Nick. And yeah, thanks also for reminding us all that, of course, you have got deeply steeped in Camden's journey as well over the last 15 years and have taken that all into your new role as well. I think we probably haven't actually got time for questions to each of you. So I'm just gonna really endorse, I think, one of the comments that Nick made about the language that's being used to describe some of these reform initiatives in places. And I totally agree. I mean, I think it isn't common for us to talk about things like kindness and love and care in the context of these, huge public sector organisations, certainly. But it is in Wigan, and I think it increasingly is in other places that are kind of part of this national movement for reform and for change. And it's obviously deeper than the language. It's a thing that I have to say, as outsiders to Wigan, we could feel when we walked into the council building, and we certainly felt it in the way that we actually were cared for in our partnership with Wigan Council throughout, from the sort of big things through to the very small things like, the way that we were greeted, making sure our water bottles were filled up before we went and got back on the train, just everything. And I think that's when you can feel that there's an authenticity in that language. It's easy to use those words, but actually to embed the values and those behaviours deeply in the culture of your organisation is quite something else. And I think that's something that we really, really observed, but also felt in our work with Wigan. So I'm just going to say thank you so much, Dan, Claire and Nick, for your contributions. And I'm sorry that there wasn't time for more debate, but it feels like this could have been a 2-day conference, and perhaps hopefully it will be one day. There's definitely so much scope, I think, for the facilitation of learning and exchange across organisations like Wigan and Sheffield and Camden and Gateshead, but also many, many others who we know are on this journey. And that's why it's been so brilliant to have so many organisations participating today. Thank you all very much. And I'm going to hand back over to Dawn, who'll bring us to a close.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you, Dan, Claire and Nick. That was so rich. Yeah, again, wish we could continue. Before everyone leaves, we would love to hear your thoughts. As you said, this is just the start of the conversation. So we're going to quickly share the Menti back with you again, and we're interested in your takeaways from today, your takeaways, your reflections. So if you'd like to go to the Menti and share on there, we'd love to hear what's kind of standing out to you as we leave the session today. So yeah, if we get online, and then Grace will move to the first question. If you'd like to share your takeaways from today. And just to say, we will be sharing the recording from today, all of the slides, a copy of the report, and we will be looking at all of your takeaways and your responses to the next question to try and think about where does this conversation go next? What other opportunities to connect are there? And yeah, how can Wigan learn from other places as well? It's not just a one-way conversation. There's lots that Wigan Borough, Wigan Council want to learn from all of you as well. So we'll give it one more minute on this question, and then we will move to the next one. And apologies to rush you through, but in the interests of time, we're going to move to the next question, which is Do you still have questions? Are there things you'd like to explore further? What are the conversations you want to continue having? So Claire talked about, you know, starting a network, continuing these conversations, exploring these issues together. So any ideas, please pop them down here. Then us and Wigan Council will review and think about what we can do to keep connecting all of us in this conversation and keep, you know, having that influence to SW1, as Nick put it. While we answer this question, apologies, Councillor Molyneux, I haven't given you too long to close, but we'd love to hand over to you for some closing thoughts.
Thank you very much, Dawn, because I think this morning has highlighted the interest in partnership working in it very much so, and I think some of the comments that have been made are absolutely brilliant in terms of we're on this journey together. We're on a journey, even though the deal led the way very early on in our this part of the journey, but it's an ongoing journey which I think a lot of people now want to be part of, and I think you've summed up quite really when you said it's not just about what we can say to people of what we are doing in Wigan, it's about us learning from other people as well. I think it's so important that this journey that I feel that public service, local government, health service is on, is the one that we learn together, and I'm very confident in what we are doing here. And the work we've done with Collaborate in particular is been exceptional. And all I can say is thank you to everybody who's joined in this morning. Certainly the comments that we've heard has certainly been refreshing. And we just want to be part of what we all can deliver together. And I think partnership working expresses that, whether it's voluntary sector, whether it's health, public services in general. And I think it's a big step in terms of what we want to deliver, and it is about that caring aspect, it is about that love, and it is about listening, and that's what we would like to say that we are involved in, and I'm sure other people want to be involved in as well. So thank you very much for everybody who's been involved this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Molyneux. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to everyone that's attended, and also to Wigan colleagues who've been typing away furiously in the chat trying to answer all of those questions. So yeah, I suppose my closing thought for today is about the choices that we can make. It's a really tough context we're all operating in, but I think from Wigan, from Sheffield, from what everyone's talked about today, there are choices about the leadership we demonstrate, the language that we use, our willingness to genuinely listen and to act on that. So yeah, we do want to continue this conversation. We'll be in touch very soon, and invite all of you to be part of continuing to share and build this movement together. Thanks, everyone. Grace, whether we've got any Northern Soul to exit.